Okay, again, good afternoon, good early evening. Thank you all for being here. Dr. Archie, would you do us the honor of introducing your team, please?
Yes. Make sure I have everything pulled up. Good afternoon, or good evening now. It's a pleasure for us, Madam President, fellow City Council personnel. It's a privilege for us to have the opportunity to spend some time with you this evening to kind of talk about the RACE Commission. On the call tonight, we have sort of the organizational leadership, staff, and partners of the RACE Commission, which is a collaborative co-opportunity between Monroe County and the City of Rochester. On the call, we have Bill Johnson, who is the former City of Rochester mayor, who serves as co-chair of the commission. We have Arlene Santiago, who is the senior vice president, general counsel, and director at ESL, and who also serves as a co-chair. We also have Dr. Mohammed Shafique, who is currently the executive director out at Nazareth College, and these three serve as the co-chairs of the RACE Commission. For staff reflected on the call tonight for the City of Rochester, it is myself, Dr. Archie, the Chief Equity Officer, as well as Amam Ikpat, which is out of the Office of the Chief of Staff, Carlette Clear, the Associate Digital Communications Assistant. Out of Monroe County, we have the Deputy County Executive, Corinda Crossdale. We have the Chief Community Engagement Officer and the lead staff of the RACE Commission, who is Dr. Candace Lucas. We have Commissioner Thalia Wright, Commissioner of DHS, and we have Mr. Mike Henry, the Community Relations Coordinator. We also have one of our partners affiliated with RACE, and that is Mr. Simeon Bannister, who is the Vice President of Community Programs for the Rochester Area Community Foundation.
Thank you. And with us on the City Council side, is Councilmember Jose Pio, Councilmember Malik Evans, Councilmember Mitch Gruber, Councilmember, our newest council member, is his first meeting, Miguel Melendez, Councilmember Lachey Harris, Councilmember Mike Patterson, Councilmember Mary Lupian, and Councilmember Vice President Willie Lightfoot. We're also joined by our council staff, Katie Hasselander, and I think BJ Scanlon is probably on here someplace. And from the mayor's office, who's joining us from the mayor's office? I know you are Dr. Archie, but it's Joanne Breves. We usually take about an hour for our work sessions, and I know you all have a lot of information to share, and we look forward to receiving it. So please, with that, please begin.
Thank you, we appreciate it. Is it possible to gain access to share the screen for a moment? I think we have just as a matter of 1 or 2 slides that we wish to share, if that's okay.
You should have permission now.
Thank you. So thank you, Madam President. Thank you, City of Council personnel, for the lovely invitation that we have received to provide you some updates and information regarding the work and the updates of the status of the RACE Commission. We will do our best to make sure that we are concise tonight, but to be very deliberate in our communication to provide you as leaders and process owners of some of the outcomes of the work that we are working on, so that this is really emphasized about the outcomes that we all say, both the city and the county, we are looking to have as it relates to this work that we're doing. What we do have here is, I'm gonna try to get this screen to show on that, okay. So what we do have here is sort of a working session agenda that we will be following for the most part. Madam President, can we see the working session agenda? Is that on the screen now, just to make sure?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
So that what we wanted to do is to make sure that we were responding specifically to the inquiries that were posed of us in advance, but as well as provide additional information that we thought would be very relevant to the ongoing work of the commission, and allow the multiple different stakeholders to be a part of that discussion who are reflected amongst the RACE commission structure. What we realized at the beginning of this work is that we collectively are charged to provide and make recommendations for nationally identified challenges by providing possible recommendations for local solutions. And we take this work very seriously, and we appreciate both the efforts of the city and the county, as well as our partners who have been a part of this work as we continue to drive the systemic change based off of racial and structural equity throughout the city and the county. And so having said that, it is my privilege, as stated a moment ago, to introduce sort of our staff and the chairs, as well as one of the consultant personnel who is on the call tonight. I think it's two of them, and that's Erica Rosenberg, as well as Dr. Donna Harris, who represents CGR as one of the partners who are providing us support with the Race Commission's work. Myself, and I also want to allow my colleague and one of the fellow co-chairs, who would also be Dr. Mohammed Shafique, to provide any specific context on the roles or any additional information about the introduction of what we're going to be doing for the rest of the evening. Dr. Shafique?
Yes, that's very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Archie. So I think you will have a detail when Mayor Bill Johnson comes to give you more details. But right now, what we are doing, we are, I think, almost 6 weeks by now, more than a month that we have started the work. So the 9 working groups, what we are doing right now, there are 2 types of things that they're meeting almost every week. And the, excuse me, I was teaching all the day today, and my throat is a little bit down. So the mental health group and the addiction services group meet twice a week. And they are working, as we have heard from, as the county executive have said, what are the most priority, the most urgent things to be done? Which,
Dr. Shafique, Dr. Shafique, I don't mean to interrupt you, but what I want to do is to make sure that we are staying on target with rolling this out in a methodical way that is very, very systemic. So I want you to come back to be able to provide that context a little bit later, but if we could for right now, there is the roles. So the staff are here reflected amongst the city and the county, right? And talking about how our role is specifically to support the leadership that is provided by the chairs. And the chairs receive that guidance and that instruction from the charge from both the county executive as well as the mayor. And so wanting to make sure that we understand the respective roles that are outlined per organizational leadership structure, we work in partnership and tandem daily, Monday through Friday, and even on weekends, to make sure that we are supporting the outcomes and the trajectory of what the
that's what I was coming to it, so that how every group is meeting and what they are discussing together. So the co-chairs, each co-chairs have 3 groups that we are meeting. Some are meeting twice a week, some are meeting once in a week, and how we are working together, how we are observing what the facilitators are doing, what the different groups. There are 200 people in all 9 groups. So how they are managed, how things are happening. And both the groups are working hard to come up with the objectives, what the city and the county has asked us. The objective is the long-term structural reforms and changes. That is systematic, in other words, for justice and equity, racial justice. And it's very important that we thoroughly examine the laws, the loopholes in the system, and that's what they are engaged into it. So, and there, which I was saying before, there are top issues, priority issues that they are looking into it. There are secondary issues, but all the 3 co-chairs are in contact with them to meet with the very objectives that has been set up by the mayor and the county executive to us. So it's a very, it's a job actually, just to say, and then I will close myself. It's actually affecting our lifestyle. That much we are engaged from morning till evening, what we are doing and what we are trying to see. really to come up with something that is tangible that can really give a long range what we are doing for racial and structural equity. Those long range reforms can come out of that, and hopefully we will succeed in doing that.
Thank you, Dr. Shafique. Your leadership, as well as the other two co-chairs, is and will continue to be imperative when it comes to the sustainability and the charges that are developed for the Race Commission. If we could now, what I would like to do is I would like to have sort of a framing that highlights the purpose and the rationale of the group, that provides context for the work that is being implemented by the commission. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite Simeon Bannister to provide us a brief sort of summary of the context of how we are framing this work and the purpose and rationale for the direction of the commission. Simeon, if you could, please.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Archie, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody tonight. And in fact, I was sitting here chuckling to myself that nobody told the new guy you didn't have to wear a tie. But at any rate, the Community Foundation, the role that we're playing is offering both fiduciary and financial support, and then also providing some intellectual and data support. And it's really in that spirit, I had a chance to share some thoughts with the RASE Commission over an hour. So I get the awesome task of trying to distill that down to about 2 minutes here. So we'll see if we can hit the high points. There are two thoughts I'd leave you with. One is about context, particularly historical context. And then second is about scope. As we think about the framing of the work of the RASE Commission. In terms of historical context, it's important that we walk away knowing that there is a unique and particular set of circumstances that have led us to the moment that we are today. That there's certainly national trends and societal trends, but in Rochester, there are some specific things that happen in this community. We know that in the mid-1950s, we started to see the pattern of growth of Rochester's communities of color that prior to had been infinitesimal, less than 2% in the 1950 census. We know that that growth, as it picked up, a whole series of policies and practices were implemented here in Rochester, things like redlining and restrictive covenants, and a whole bevy of other policy decisions and choices that have led us to a place where we end up with an extractive economy that draws resources largely out of the city of Rochester and deposits them around the city of Rochester in a way that evidences continued racial bias. That is the fact. That is what we see. That is the truth. And so we have to contend with this set of very unique and particular circumstances in the work of the RASE Commission. So that's number one. Number two, and you heard me reference policies and practices, but you'll also note on the screen a piece of work that comes from an organization called FSG. It's a consulting work. They wrote a piece called The Waters of Systems Change. I would encourage folks to check it out. But what they attempt to do in that piece is to identify 6 conditions for systems change, and that's what you see on the screen. And so when we think about what it means to make meaningful systems change, we know that there's structural change as a component of it, kind of explicit and easily visible. We know that there's relational change, kind of the power dynamics and the connections that folks have. And we know that in terms of transformative change, mental models become an essential part of it. The RASE Commission is not intended, so far as I've learned, to transform all of racial equity in Rochester. That would be perhaps a bit of a bridge too far. We know that there are a lot of folks that are working in a number of different modalities in this community to try to engage some of these various levels. But when we think about that top level in terms of policies and practices and resource flows, we also recognize the interconnectedness between these levels. The RASE Commission has set out the goal of identifying some of the specific legal and policy concerns, the way that dollars flow from the public sector into our community, and to wrestle with how those dollars flow, to wrestle with how resources are set up, to ask the questions about how policy then impacts some of the relationship dynamics, the power dynamics, the mental models, and to come up with a new way of doing business here in this community. And I think that's an exciting thing for this commission to be doing. So I suppose I would leave you with the notion that you might manage your expectations, right? Be mindful about the areas that are real levers for change. Again, particularly with respect to policies and practices, but also expect that the upshot of those changes will certainly have an impact in a number of other areas, including, again, transformative mental models and changing the nature of power and how it flows in Rochester.
Thank you, Simeon. We appreciate the update. Resulting back to the charge and the race structure of the Race Commission and further roles, I think we were going to have that provided by one of our co-chairs.
Thank you. And this is not part of my original script, but I have to point out and continually push back against the notion that the problems that Rochester experience and our experience are unique to this city. I've constantly said to people that we need to stop beating up on ourselves by saying that somehow God has cursed Rochester to the exclusion of other communities. The problems that are here are found across urban communities everywhere. What's unique about Rochester and what people do not take into consideration is the kind of responses, and in some instances, very innovative responses that have followed these changes. And we don't study history too much. If you go back and look in the aftermath of the riots, you will find significant, innovative things that came out of Rochester that were written up in scholarly journals. The city went well beyond what was expected of any community, and certainly one of this size, in terms of its responses. That's what we need to capitalize on. That history of unique responses that we now face here. And let me just cite one if I can, and I'll get back on track and I'll keep my eye on the clock so I don't exceed my time limit. In 1975, the Rochester mayor and the city council appointed a commission to look into the operations of the Rochester Police Department in the aftermath of the gruesome murder of Denise Hawkins by a member of the Rochester Police Department. That was a citizens commission. I happened to be fortunate enough to serve on it, along with people like Jim McCullough and Charlie Cremey, famous, well-renowned criminal lawyer who was the chairperson of that commission, as well as Judge Charles Willis, who was the other co-chairperson. And we were given unfettered authority to examine every single practice in the Rochester Police Department. No information was withheld from us. And that commission took a year to do its work and made profound and revolutionary almost recommendations to the city, which the Rochester City Council adopted almost unanimously. We came up with almost 100 recommendations that changed the nature of policing in this community for many, many, many years. Now, the question that I return to is what happened to those reforms? And over the years, they tend to diminish and disappear. But to say that this community has a reputation of being resistant to change, I think is unfair to the legacy of this community. And I could cite many, many others. As I say, the aftermath of the 1964 riots, if you go back and look at the kind of innovative solutions, but if you go look for them today, they don't exist. So that's the challenge for us and for this commission. How to examine what are the problems, contemporaneously identify the barriers that exist that will restrict or prohibit change, and then to recommend strategies for the remediation of those problems, as well as steps to ensure that the community will be held accountable in perpetuity. One of the problems we have is the turnover in our leadership in this community, not just in the political arena, but in the private arena. And somehow things are associated with certain people. So when that person leaves, that initiative seems to have no more import. We want to now create a system through this RASE process where the community owns the outcomes. Doesn't matter who the mayor is. It doesn't matter who the chairman, who the president of the University of Rochester is, who the head of the Chamber of Commerce is. They are community owned. Community has bought into it. The community was engaged in the development of these processes, and that they will be put in place on a kind of granite so that they cannot be easily diminished or removed. So I feel comfortable that we are working to put that in place. When this commission was announced in June, the mayor and the county executive appointed 3 co-chairs. They identified staff, and we worked for 6 weeks prior to the appointment of the remainder of the commission to put in place a structure which I am confident that you'll hear more about as we go along, and you can refine it with the questions that you have. Put in place a structure that will deliver sustainable, meaningful, and contemporary changes, and that they will stand the test of time.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. We appreciate that. Next, we will have Dr. Lucas and Arlene Santiago, one of our co-chairs, another one of our co-chairs, to kind of walk us through the work plans and the priorities that are established for the working groups. So at this time, I will turn it over to Arlene.
Thank you, Dr. Archie, and good evening, everyone. Dr. Lucas and I are going to take a few minutes to describe the framework that has been used to create the work plans for each of the 9 working groups. I'll go through the general outline that those groups have been working with, and Dr. Lucas will go ahead and describe how the working groups are engaging with the community to get their insights and inputs and to ensure the work reflects their voices. To be honest, the framework itself is very straightforward, which is a good thing when you are working with the deep-rooted and complex systems that support structural racism. The framework itself for those work plans consists of 5 primary steps, complemented with planning items for each of those. And basically they're, 1, you review and brainstorm issues. Number 2, you understand the role of local government, how local government interacts with their specific focus areas. Number 3, you prioritize areas to study with the lens of finding those issues where local government can have the highest impact. Number 4, you study the issues, explore solutions, and propose revisions to existing priorities and policies or laws or legislation. And finally, your last step would be actually drafting your work group report. And that report itself will obviously result in what we give to the community in terms of the multiple areas, the 9 working group areas that we plan on address. I wasn't sure, Dr. Archie, to be sure, I wasn't thinking that I was doing the working group structure. I thought I was doing the second one. So hopefully that is the case. If not, I can move back up and do the working group structure if you need me to go through the 9. But in essence, that's really what the framework is for how we will address, how the working groups will address the multiple areas that they're focused on. Obviously, in addition to that, we have planning items to assist them with. They've been working for each of those 5 objectives to identify, how they're going to come together to do the work, what resources they need in order to meet their objectives, and then finally their plans for community engagement. And really, Dr. Lucas will share some of the work and some of the planning that's been done in those areas.
Thank you, Arlene. I appreciate it.
Okay, so thank you and good evening, everybody. So I'll cover the working group structure, Arlene. So you've heard us talk about the 9 working groups. I'll name them for you. They are business development, criminal justice, housing, education, healthcare, job creation, policing, mental health and addiction, and human services. Those 9 working groups are separated and each of them have a co-chair. So each of the 3 co-chairs have 3 working groups that report up to them. Each of the 21 commissioners are co-facilitators on each of those working groups. And some of the working groups have, they either have 2 or 3 commissioners as the co-facilitators. We are about 6 weeks into the process right now, and they are going through those, the first 2 steps of the list that Arlene just articulated. But the intent of RASE from the very beginning was always to be community involved. What we said was that we wanted it to be an open, transparent, and community engaged process. And we've used this since the beginning, even in the selection of the commissioners. And so we wanted to make sure that as the commissioners were selected, they were not just handpicked by any entity, that it wasn't just the loudest voices or the voices that we always hear coming to the table, but that we really respected the diversity of the city and the county, since this is a joint effort, and that we allowed the community to really select who they wanted to be on the commission. And we plan to keep that community involved process through this, through the whole process. We know that all of the knowledge is not contained within the commissioners or the chairs or the staff or the consultants that are working on RASE, but that real answers will come from the communities that are most impacted and affected by the structural inequities that we're trying to dismantle. So the commissioners will be working on surveys that they plan to put out to the community, having town hall meetings, having one-on-one conversations, reaching out to various stakeholders that already have been doing work in these areas, looking at plans that already exist. We've already received legislation that has been crafted by entities in the community that have said, hey, listen, we want you guys to take a look at this because we've been working on it. We know that the answers are not necessarily going to come from the people that are around the table, but really those individuals throughout our community that have the expertise. And so the plan for the next few months will be engaging the community in multiple ways and making sure that we're hearing from the voices out there across the community, across the city and the county, not just the stories or the frustration or the pain that people are feeling, but also the answers that they may have to how we can make these structures work for everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our communications team, Mike Henry, who's going to also talk about some of the communications that we're going to use.
Yes, good evening, everybody. Dr. Lucas pretty much hit the nail on the head there. We have stressed from the get-go that we want this process to be as community involved as possible, that we want the community to own the process. With that, we have explored other avenues that we have to get this information out to the public. We have started a Facebook page that is gaining attention, and to this point, we have put things such as press releases, and Mayor Johnson recently did an interview with Connections. We placed that on there, and we look forward to, as the work progresses, to put that work on the page and have that work be broadcasted live for everybody to see, for people to be involved in working groups through various different methods, and to move on from there. Really, it's just ensuring the idea that internal communications become external and we involve the community as much as we can. And again, we will continue to use our Facebook page at the Commission on Racial and Structural Equity, RASE, and as well continue to update our website as information becomes more available.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. And just to add a little bit more onto that, and how it really relates to the charge of RACE, which is to, before we go out and start looking at what to bring in new, the current structure or the charge articulates our priority is to actually build upon what is already there. So as Candace stated, our intent is to reach out to the local community organizations and our partners and our local experts who have been doing a good bit of this work with their respective sectors so that we are bridging them into the work, so that whatever we begin to develop and draft as we get into this next phase of the work of the council builds upon those expertise and those prior data points that really can further the work going forward. And so this is where in this upcoming next phase of the work, there's going to be a stronger push for that engagement with the community, as they stated, with those multiple platforms of how we are intending to effectively sort of do that. So thank you for that. I appreciate the updates from both of you. Next, we have our projected outcomes of RACE, and that will be facilitated by I think it's Corinda Crosstep.
Some of this is going to be a bit of a recap. A lot of information has been provided. So we talked about the commission and their analysis of inequitable laws, policies, and practices. This is based on the premise that the resulting consequences of inequitable laws, practices, and policies are not controlled by the individual, as was stated during Simeon's presentation. Dr. Archie articulated the mission of the RACE Commission, which is to identify those local laws that promote or seek to dismantle structural racism. Therefore, as we think about the outcome, it's really going to be a series of recommendations that meet that particular mission. So if we go back and think about what Simeon presented, that top line that looks at explicit ways to address racism, think about this as an exploratory research. There's no question to be asked, but to explore what exists and where we can have impact for change. This will be phase one of an ongoing process. Once we receive those recommendations, we'll start thinking about what our next phase looks like, how we can insert measurable results, and how we continue to keep our community engaged as we address the recommendations that are put before us.
Thank you, Corinda. We appreciate it. Next, we will have sort of next steps beyond the commission's timeline, which is important for us to really, in the beginning, what we stated is that we have to develop or have insight, the end at the beginning, so that what we are working on and creating and developing along the way actually aligns with the measurable, substantiated, beyond our time work that we are looking to lead. And so I want to invite Talia, if I could, to talk about some of the next steps that we're looking at with the commission's work beyond the 6-month timeframe. Commissioner.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. So just to echo Dr. Archie, the work doesn't stop after the commission is over, looking at some of the recommendations that will be put forth by with the work through CGR and the plans that will be provided once all the work groups come together and start to look at the inventory of those laws, policies, practices that we talked about earlier. Just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that Monroe County is putting forth right now. So right now in front of our legislative body, we have Monroe County is looking to create an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We've also in the process of onboarding our Director of Addiction Services, noting that we have a huge opportunity to work with our community and how we provide services a little differently. With the Director of Addiction Services, we're also going to look to hire about 6 community advocates that will be working with our community as well. Also internally, looking at a lot of programmatic changes. So without being remiss by not speaking on the incident around Daniel Prude and a lot of information regarding mental health services. We're right now working in different task force in tandem with the mental health and addictions work group on looking how we're allocating mental health dollars and providing services. If I can say possibly reimagining how we work in that division where we oversee that with the Department of Human Services with a huge budget. So again, just kind of looking at our own internal policies right now, concurrently, as we also work towards the recommendations that will be put forth by the commission once we're done with the 6 months. Anything else? Thank you.
Thank you, Talia. And so if I could, we are personally as a group very grateful to have council persons that are sitting actually on the race commission, Councilman Gruber and Councilman Lightfoot, who are part of the work, and their impact and their voice and their the expertise and the position that they sit in as a reflected governing members of the governing body of the city of Rochester is important. And that's important not just because we are having their input, but because there is a specific stakeholder ownership that we are having to connect with both the county legislature as well as city council, and being able to take the recommendations in addition to the leadership of this group, which is both the mayor and the county exec, and really facilitate their success in pushing them forward. And so what we don't want to have be an expectation is that the race commission themselves is expected to make this happen. But what we will say is that the race commission is a true conduit that will help facilitate the true systemic recommendations for change that we are looking for city council and local government and county ledge to really partner to say, how will we operationalize these recommendations in a way that really pushes the systemic racial equity metrics forward for both the city and the county. And so this is where we need your help. We need your voice, not just during its development for funding and providing resources, because that's great, but sustainable, long-term, recognizing that the council, that the race commission within 6 months can only do so much, but that how are we making this work collectively sustainable beyond all of us? And how are we working with our governing structures in place to effectively make sure that that's occurring? And so this is where we wanted to make sure that as a commission, as chairs, as staff, as personnel who are serving under the working groups, that we are extending our hand to you as city council to say, we wish to partner with you in confirming this work can be successful and be sustainable for all of the constituents. And so with that being said, I do want to allow some time, because I know it's 10 minutes after 5 now, to provide an open dialogue or some questions to be asked so that we can provide any clarity on any points spoken of and not spoken of here today, recognizing the need for a true understanding across the aisle of the work that's being done and the true understanding of the sustainable work needing to take place long-term.
Can I quickly follow you, Dr. Archie, by saying that while what we have laid out to you is where we are today and where we expect to head, we don't know yet what recommendations are going to be coming out of this group, because as has been stated, we have a lot of community input to seek. I will tell you that we have a huge amount of work, and what the 3 co-chairs are doing as we sit in on these meetings is not to be prescriptive, not to tell them that there's some plan that they have to follow, but to remind them that we have a short time in which to do this work. They have a lot of energy. They have lots of, I'm overseeing the criminal justice and the policing group. And there's been some feeling that maybe we should only have one of those groups. There is a huge amount of work when you look at the other aspects of the criminal justice system that many people believe would be subordinated, if not completely overlooked, if we were just focusing on the policing issue. That's what the community is focused on now. But there are other aspects of the criminal justice system. They have, between them, they have 17 subgroups. And we know that all of that work's not going to get into the report. So it's what I want to leave the impression with you on is that this work is massive. I think somebody's already said that. And it's not going to end in February. But we do want to try to prioritize where we're headed. So I can assure you, there's not going to be some mad stampede. There is a way that we can bring all of this together in a very coherent fashion that will provide a pathway for this community to begin to make the kind of long needed, overdue systemic changes. So if you understand that we probably will come back to you a couple of months from now, we'll have a whole different view and perspective on this work, because it will have been unfolded as we now seek all of these players. Somebody is alleging that we're working in secret. You can't be working in secret when you got 200 people are working on a project. They say it won't be transparent. It will be transparent. There are all kinds of devices to get community input. And they say it's illegitimate because it doesn't have the right people on it. Because to be very honest, the people making those allegations are saying that because they're not on it. And they view that therefore by their not being there, the work is illegitimate. I think we have a great amount of diverse skills on this in this commission. And I think we will all be surprised in the outcome of this first phase of this work. So I want to give you that assurance that we all take our work seriously. It's not just me and Arlene and Mohammed Shafique. It's Corinda, it's Sivas, it's Candace. We've got 6 brilliant young interns that we picked up from area colleges. We've got CGR. It is really, I think, when the truth comes out, we will have one of the most dynamic processes anywhere in this country. And it's not just going to be window dressing. It's going to produce real change.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. We appreciate that. At this time, we open it up. President Scott, we open it up to any questions or comments that we may be able to respond to.
You're muted. You're muted, Madam President.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Thank you. So maybe I missed it or didn't focus properly, or I'm coming from a different point. When this commission was announced, it was shortly after we as members of council had talked about the need to create we call it a task force, a blue ribbon task force, something like that, dealing with policing. That was the primary body of work that we needed to address. And I understand that the things that are related to issues of policing are interconnected with all kinds of stuff, from poverty to lack of education to poor housing. I understand that. But somehow I don't sense the same level of intense recognition or work on the topic of policing, which is what I'm listening for. Did I miss that?
I promise I did not put Loretta up to ask that question, Bill, Arlene, and Mohammed. I swear it just shows that Loretta and I have joined brain power.
All right, so let me just try to put this to rest as quickly as I can. When the county executive and the mayor announced this commission on June 24th, they did it in writing. And I will refer you back to the announcement at that time where they said, yes, policing, but they said this commission would have to focus on other areas. That was a charge they gave to us, okay? If you have any dispute, you need to take it up with the mayor and the county executive, because this is the charge they gave to us. Now, I will assure you, Madam President, that the issues of policing are not being subverted, not being diminished. In fact, when I leave this call, I will be going into 2 meetings, one with criminal justice and one with policing. And the level of energy, the level of concern, the comprehensiveness of their work. But I want to remind you that this is not just our charge. And we have taken many, many steps to ensure the other agencies and institutions in this community that their work is not going to be subverted, not going to be subsumed, because there's a city-county commission. They bring a lot of energy, they have credibility, they have focus, they have the opportunity to petition to their elected officials, and we are going to invite them to come and talk with us as well, and probably reinforce their message by including some of their work in this report. The policing issue is not being subverted, but we were not given a charge. We were not created as the Rochester Policing Commission. I tell you to go back and look at the language that we were given, and that's the job I accepted, not to just focus on one, because I would have told the mayor at the time, this is not the job for me, all right? You know me, Madam President, you worked with me for 12 years and more. You know I ran an agency that had offered a lot of services, and I've strived over my career to talk about how we connect everything. Because a person walks in the Urban League because that kid is not doing well in school, we don't walk them out of the door. We say to them, you got a housing problem, you got an employment problem, you got a health problem. We have services in this agency that can help you. And that's been my whole career. And I see that. So I just want to give you the assurance that it's not in any way being diminished.
Loretta, can I ask a
Thank you,
follow-up?
sir. Vice President Lightfoot.
Thank you, Madam President, and to Dr. Cephas, Dr. Shafique, Mayor Johnson, and Ms. Arlene Santiago, our co-chairs, as well as all of the council members and all the rest of you. Thank you for being with us this evening. My statements will be very brief. I just have 2 points for consideration. I'm not looking for dialogue about it so much or even an answer for it right now. However, I want to offer for consideration two things. One, I see a lot of alignment with this work. And of course, I'm on the commission along with Dr. Gruber, and I'm co-chairing the Business Development Committee. And I agree, Mayor Johnson, there's a lot of energy and recommitment from people that's really diving deep into this. And I agree with you that we're going to be amazed by the work that comes out of this body. With that being said, I think there's going to be so much work and recommendations that come out of this body that it's going to need to continue. And what I mean by that is I think there's alignment here through the National League of Cities and the real initiative and Reggie work that's been done. Part of that recommendation from the National League of Cities when they came to Rochester and reviewed us and gave us recommendations is they talked about us having a council and that council would live outside of government as we're being here presented to us today, that this body of work will be owned by the community. I would offer for consideration that there be a thought process of this commission continuing with this framework at some point after the 6 months and everything's been presented to the community and whatnot, but there be a consideration. I think Brighton has one. There's some other communities that have a racial equity commission that our council that is almost like a board, like our property board or some of the other boards that we commissions that we have and boards that we have, that this would continue because the work is so extensive and is going to go beyond just 6 months or a year. So I would offer that for consideration as some alignment there. And I think the framework is already built that could be a possibility and a potential. Part 2 is, and I've talked about this with many of you in the past, and I've talked about it at our commissions of the whole, that I still feel like there's one fundamental flaw with the commission. And when we talk about accountability and we talk about, oftentimes seems like all roads lately are leading back to City Hall. But we know that that's not true, that a lot of these roads are going to lead back to the state. They're going to lead back to federal government. They're going to lead back to some of the other governmental partners that, in my opinion, are being let off the hook because they're not at this table. And I think that's a fundamental flaw with this particular commission, that there's no state representatives, there's no federal representatives at this table. And they should be at this table if we're going to talk about systemic, institutional, and structural racism throughout all systems that are intertwined into the federal government, the county government, the city government, and the state government. So if we're really going to be moving this body of work and not parking lotting ideas because they don't fit in county or city government, to be really intentional about the delivery of results, it would mean that these individuals, in my opinion, need to be at least invited to the table. And that to me will show a real commitment for moving this work forward instead of an advocacy hat, which we may end up having to have, and I fully support that. But it's nice to have an advocate when you also have an ally in government to help you push forth some of these initiatives. Thank you.
Councilmember Gruber, followed by Councilmember Lupian.
Yes, thank you. And I made that comment before because this is, as the three co-chairs and the staff knows, that is precisely the thing that I've brought up at each and every meeting of the RACE Commission, President Scott, is that the ultimately, my opinion, frankly, is that the scope of the commission is far more broad than I think when the city council initially started to talk about it. But I recognize what Mayor Johnson said. I recognize that that's the charge given to them and that they are set upon there being a kind of larger holistic approach. And I'm not here, I've promised the three co-chairs I won't continue to try to be a stick in the mud around that. But I do think it's an important opportunity right now to ask a very specific pointed question, which is to say that we as a council deliberated and essentially allocated money to what became the RACE Commission in part over debates around our city budget. And in particular around our city's police department budget, which whether or not anybody else, regardless of what anybody wants to believe, the fact is that it is by far the single biggest budget item and has rarely seen cuts over the years, despite our city regularly hearing claims of being safer and lower on crime than it's been in a long time. So my question is, the policing budget or the policing work of the commission, I'm wondering from Dr. Archie's perspective, or perhaps other folks, how does the RACE Commission's work ultimately influence the city's budgeting process? And similarly, how does the RACE Commission's work ultimately influence the county's budgeting process, especially since those two budgets are on different timelines? I want to understand, the proof is in the pudding at the budgetary level. Have the co-chairs heard how we expect that work to kind of blend in with each other?
Can I speak to that?
Please.
First, let me say to Councilman Lightfoot, I heard that point. I transmitted your concern, and I think you'll see something come of bringing these other representatives to the table. So your point's well taken. To Councilman Gruber's question, yes, the policing group is looking at the budget. Now, let me say this, as someone who oversaw the police budget for 12 years, that incorporated in my budget, I understand all of the issues, and in many areas, it's an opaque budget. All right, it has never really been put under the kind of scrutiny that it needs to be put under because the police department was on a kind of a pedestal for years. All right, never got cut. Council President Scott can remember sitting in a meeting back in 2002 or 2003, where I asked every department to cut their budgets by 10%. And I believe it was her voice that said, you exempting the largest source of funds in your request. I said, oh no, the police department's being asked for one time. And she said, no, the city school district takes up a huge chunk, over 25% of the city's budget, and you are exempting them from this process. So we included them, but they don't get included too often. So Councilman Gruber, I think we can begin a process of identifying how this discussion can proceed. You and I had a discussion about zero-based budgeting as an option, which people don't talk about much anymore. Okay, we're not going to solve that problem, but I think we can give you a pathway to begin to address that problem, and look at how other communities may have addressed that same problem. So that's what I see our role as being.
But Mayor, can I just add the specific question I'm trying to ask, and again, maybe it's for city or county staff. Have there been talks between the co-chairs and the budget directors at city and county level? You know, for obviously, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, Mayor Johnson, but for folks who are listening out there, and for our new council person, the city council is not sitting there going line by line and generating a budget. We are given a draft of a budget by the administration. So what I'm trying to understand is, how does the work of RACE ultimately feed into the budgets, the city budgets process. And I don't know if Dr. Archie, if you have an answer to that, or if that's something that we need to get a specific answer on the record from Chris Wagner and from the administration. And I don't know if Finance Chair Evans has heard anything about this for the record.
So I can only speak about the limited information that I do know, but what I can do is commit to following up on that for specifics of the request. What I do know is that the people who charge this commission are both the mayor as well as the county exec, who have a very core function in developing budgets for both respective entities. And so as the recommendations have been asked by these two leaders who oversee the operations and the administrative functions on both sides, providing them that information is to be followed up on as the recommendations by their leadership. And so this is where I would say that the design of the group, from what I understand it to be, is that they are open to the recommendations provided by RACE to actually impart them into their decision-making processes going forward for budget. What I do know is that last year, if I remember correctly, when it came to the city council's budgetary discussions, when there were talks and discussions about defunding, one of the things that was stated is that there was no plan in place where there had been official recommendations for what that could or would look like. And so what I would say is that some of the recommendations that may be offered and provided as a result of Race Commission's work may be able to provide some guidance on the respective areas budgeting that could be used for decision-making, both by the respective leaders as well as the specific governing bodies, city council and county legs for consideration as well.
Well, it needs to. I mean, that's the point, is that it needs to. There's no point in any of this work if it doesn't. So I think those are answers we need to get from the administration of how the two things are going to work into each other.
Yeah, we haven't. Can I say very quickly? We're getting there, Councilman. We are now going to be calling people in October and November. So I will make sure that the Policing Commission will call the finance directors for both the city and the county. I will, as a result of sitting in this meeting, I will give that a directive to them that they add those people and that they begin to look at the components, the way that budget is made up. So if people are going to come with a proposal about defunding the police or re-envisioning the police, there needs to be some factual basis on which that can be predicated. So we will get that information, and with your continued push, you'll make sure that those people get called. And we'll tell the mayor and the county executive that when they're called, they should be directed to come to talk to them, okay?
Mayor, to add to your
Thank you, Mayor Johnson.
Can I add one point here, what Mayor said?
Certainly.
What we are about to come up with structural reforms and changes, meaning there may be some departments merging, there may be other things. That means once we come up with those structural changes in reform overall in all areas, that will give tools to the city council, that will give tools to the county legislative, then how to change it, and then how to readjust their budgeting. Whatever we gave to you about policing, certainly there will be a lot of things, training, other things will be part of that too. So whatever we give to you, I think this will come eventually. That's what I said in the beginning, priority list, and then we are looking to the laws, other things that, you know, if we find loophole in the laws, that's your job then to change the laws. But we will pinpoint to those things. Similarly, budgetary adjustment, then how council will do it, how the county will do it. We will pinpoint those areas that you need to re-look into that, and these are our recommendations for structural changes and reforms.
And Madam President,
Councilmember Lupian? Councilmember Lupian?
Thank you. I have a comment and then a question. And I apologize ahead of time if this comment comes off as rough. In the presentation, I heard a lot of something that I'm hearing frequently when we are confronted with looking at our past and being honest about it. In that, I think we have in government a propensity to tooting our own horns sometimes. And in this work, we're going to have to be really honest about how we have failed in the past. You know, we have abysmal rates of childhood poverty and quality of life for people of color in the city. And if we are not honest about where we came from and how we got here, we don't have hope of making a transformation. And so I just want to highlight that. And my question, and I wish that they tied together better, is around the Police Accountability Board. You know, it's one of the things that we say is the most progressive thing that we've done around policing, yet it's not being included in these conversations around policy and procedures. And it's my understanding that there is an opening on the policing committee. And so I wanted to bring up the fact that, you know, I think that the Police Accountability Board, as it's charged with, you know, making recommendations specifically for policing policy and procedures, that they need to be part of this conversation.
Okay. Are there any additional comments?
No, Councilmember Gruber mentioned something about money. And of course, whenever we talk about money, my ears perk up. But I can talk to Councilmember Gruber offline just to get clarification around what you mean in terms of RASE directing how money should be spent or how it's gonna be made up based upon recommendations that are gonna be made. I can tell you that I think separately as a community, we're gonna have conversations about the city's fiscal health as well as the county's fiscal health, and then reconciling those the fiscal health of both of those entities with the realities that we have. Because I can tell you right now, both entities are under tremendous stress. They were under stress before the coronavirus, and even more stressful with Corona. So I think that those should be conversations that we have, not just in addition with the RASE Commission, but also in tandem, because I think you're right. Based upon recommendations, we will have to start having those conversations early as it relates to budget. The other thing I'll say is, and I know former Mayor Johnson knows this, you know, because we start doing the city budget process so early, almost like February, I don't think it hurts to start thinking about having those conversations now. And the last thing I wanted to say was thank you to the co-chairs for all their work that they're doing. I'm sure they're getting big fat paychecks for all their work. I served on two of Bill Johnson's commissions, and I know how much work it goes into this. And I want to just say thank you for dedicating your time to this process.
I certainly add my thanks and gratitude to you all as well. So we've
wait a minute. I got a couple quick ones. Had a hand up.
Councilmember Patterson.
All right, so let me apologize for being brisk. So the impetus for the creation of the RASE committee, and it's a question, is it the governor's executive order on June 12th, reinvent, modernize police forces?
What I do know is that the RACE Commission was established and the charge was being developed prior to that request being made. So what I can't say is that one begot the other. This was actually prior to that.
I'm sorry. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. Just because we ain't got a lot of time. So, okay, is responding to that executive order part of the duty and responsibility of the RACE Commission?
Yes, and as well as the Police Accountability Board and others. Yeah, that was part of it, but not exclusively. But it is part of it. It is there, and we will respond to that.
I understand that it is not exclusively, but is it safe to say that one of your key duties and responsibilities on behalf of the city of Rochester and the county of Monroe is to help formulate a plan to meet the requirements of that executive order?
One of them, yes.
Okay, one of them.
I want to point out that Monroe County does not have the same influence over law enforcement as the city does. So each town and locality will be responsible for developing that plan according to the criteria that the governor.
I'm going to quibble with you and disagree. I'm going to quibble with you and disagree because you have a sheriff department. So
yes, we'll
be working
with Sheriff
in New York.
Baxter on that.
So this executive order covers all law enforcement in New York State. So I guess what I would like to receive from y'all in writing, or if Willie and Mitch can bring it back to us, is a better understanding of how you are going to help us formulate the policies and to meet those requirements, because it is very clear in this executive order that by April 1, 2021, in order to receive state funding for police forces, there's some specific things that you have to do. And if this executive order is part of your thought process and one of the things that you're working on meeting, that's great. And I understand that we might not have time to go back and forth in it, but this was a grave concern to me because I hadn't heard it mentioned. I hadn't heard it discussed. And so it was my concern and question was whether or not this was something that was on your radar. So from what I'm hearing, it is on your radar, and it is a strong concern of the policing subcommittee.
No, let me say, Councilman, that at no time did I think the establishment of this commission exempted the mayor and the Rochester Police Department from responding to that executive order, just like every police department in Monroe County. It's not a citizens group that's doing it. It is them. We will assist with that, but that is not our primary job. And I just want to make that clear. The policing our committee can look. They have some resources on their committee that can help, but that is really the mayor's job and the police department's job to come formulate those primary. We will not walk away from that, but that is not our main job to develop that proposal. So based on your question, I want to get clarification on that. We'll ask Dr. Archie to talk with the mayor, and we'll come up with a coherent response to your question. You will know exactly who's doing what and who will be responsible for producing that final plan.
So what stands right now, the responsibility still lies with the city of Rochester and all other localities in the county of Monroe and New York that have a response that supervise or have police forces, and that quite honestly, all it is.
You're breaking up. You're breaking up, Mike.
Okay, but this is not your duty.
Yeah, I think we can help with that. Look, I know the time is short. I promise you we'll get you an answer. I'll talk with Dr. Archie. We'll get you an answer, okay?
So I believe we've come to the end of our time.
Madam President, excuse me, Madam President. Just one last, I believe we had Mr. Bannister had one statement.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did see your hand up.
Mr. Bannister.
Where'd he go? Here he is.
Oh, right here. Yeah, I was just going to point out that the Mary Lupian had asked the earlier question about kind of facing the truth of our community. And, it's absolutely the case that in Rochester, we've got to get a little bit more comfortable with cognitive dissonance. That kind of two things can be true at the same time, that we can both be a community that is, good-hearted and has made some really important efforts. And at the same time, as she affirmed, has the highest level of childhood poverty. EdBuild's final fault lines report says that we've got the most income disparity across our school districts. Brandeis University and their geography of childhood opportunity said that we have the highest level of hoarding culture in this community. The National Tax Journal says that we're the most vulnerable community to the economic impacts of the recession related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So there can be a number of things that are true in this community at the same time. And pointing out that truth isn't a denigration of the efforts and the work in this community. In fact, it's an essential part, because I would argue that in many ways, our community, for a commission like this, the thing that has me sanguine about it, optimistic about it, is that even though we're using architecture that feels familiar, it sounds like we're doing it in a different way. And that's informed by meaningful community perspective. And it's done in a way that is strategic to avoid some of the errors of the past. But we have to acknowledge those errors of the past in order to do that. And so I'm really hopeful because I've seen those elements already in the discourse. And I think the margin of success for this commission will be the extent to which we achieve those two things: meaningful community perspective and engagement, and really being thoughtful about a strategy to look at what's happened historically in Rochester, why those commissions and boards and blue ribbon panels and so on and so forth haven't led to a more equitable and fair community, so that we can avoid that in this present moment.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you so much. So we can adjourn this meeting. Have a pleasant evening.